So I'm Doug Sholtz-Carlson. I'm the stage director for it, which basically means I tell everybody where to stand. In this project, we're going to have a bunch of video elements. We're going to have some fun staging tricks, I hope, all the way through, and those are all sort of under my purview. So I got involved in opera. My training is actually as an actor. I got involved in opera as a singer. Auditioned on kind of random chance for Minnesota Opera when I was living in Minneapolis, and got into it. And that was sort of my introduction to opera. And that led to, I also work as a fight choreographer. So I did some fight choreography for them while I was singing in the chorus. And that led to assistant directing, which led to directing. And now that's become a big chunk of my career. I do run a Shakespeare festival. So I do directing of Shakespeare. But most of my career is really opera directing. Right now, I'm part of the directing team over at the Met Opera, is probably the main gig that I'm in. And then I also work as an intimacy director in opera. So I wear lots of different hats.
Great. And is it correct that you were the first intimacy director at the Met?
That is true, yeah.
Yeah.
When they came out of the pandemic, they were looking to have an intimacy director at the Met, and so they had contacted. I had done a workshop for them, and I was living in Minneapolis at the time. They contacted me and said, "Well, we'd love to find somebody working in New York." And I looked around, and it turned out I was really one of the only people working nationally, as working in opera specifically, who specialized that way. So I called the Met and I said, "I think the person you're looking to hire is me." So, and luckily they did. And I've been there ever since. Now, I've transitioned. Now I'm on the directing team. So sometimes I work as the intimacy director and sometimes it's as a director. So
That's really cool. So how does that inform the way that you stage direct in general, having this intimacy directing experience?
well, it's a good question. I mean, when intimacy direction was getting started, it was really a kind of sub thing under fight choreography. And then eventually they realized, oh no, it's really its own thing next to fight choreography. And then they started to realize, wait, maybe intimacy is actually an umbrella over fight choreography. And then you start to realize, actually, maybe it's a kind of umbrella over everything, because it has so much to do with how we deal with each other in the rehearsal hall. Once you start to say that performers should be empowered and have some level of consent, that kind of changes everything in terms of the way we work. Opera in the past has tended to work in a really hierarchical way, and whatever the director says goes, or whatever the maestro says goes. And if we're going to find a way to work more collaboratively, so that people can really have a say about, can have real consent in the rehearsal space, then it's going to lead to collaboration in lots of other areas. Personally, I think that leads to better art. I mean, we are very much a collaborative art form, and that if everyone's voice is heard in the room, and it's ironic that in opera of all things, that in the old way we used to do opera, like a lot of people really didn't have a voice in the rehearsal room. But if everyone's voice is being heard and we're working collaboratively, I think it leads to more interesting art. So there is no aspect of my work that it doesn't inform in some way.
That's really interesting. I love how you're talking about it's like fight versus intimacy and like which one
Yeah,
is the bigger umbrella. That's really
yeah.
fascinating.
Well, I work as both, so I tell people, whether you're punching each other or kissing each other, I'm involved somehow or another.
It makes sense. There's big feelings involved in both of those things. So
Yeah. Well, and that truly is that's probably the biggest thing that intimacy direction brings in. I was a fight choreographer when fight choreography was still a little bit new to the opera world. So you would still encounter people that were not actively willing to take care of the physical health of performers. So if people got hurt in performance, not that they didn't care, but that it wasn't a priority. And now, of course, that's completely changed. Like no one is going to stage a fight in a way that is dangerous. And what we learned from that is, in taking care of people's physical safety, we actually started telling the stories better. Choreography got better. It looks more dangerous. All of those things happen. Intimacy direction is very much about the emotional health of people. And again, you get the same sort of resistance to say, well, people, it's that's what being a singer is. But the fact of the matter is, we had created a room where, if you had things that had happened in your life, if you have trauma in your life, for instance, if you had experienced some kind of sexual violence in any way, it makes it very difficult to be in the rehearsal room, because the expectation is you're going to be able to say yes to everything. And most performers do want to say yes to everything. They just might have some constraints around it or some boundaries around it. And if you're not able to, like, if you don't have a rehearsal space where you can say that that's true, then you're essentially saying to all of those people, well, you don't belong in the rehearsal room. And that means we have fewer people rehearsal and we can't tell the stories as well because we don't have those voices in the room and we can't collaborate with them.
Mhm.
Um, so it is, I do see a real parallel there between taking care of people's physical safety and then taking care of people's, emotional health so that you can do your job, you can tell difficult, challenging stories, and then you can go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. This
So
one is not necessarily a difficult, challenging, emotional story. This one is a lot more fun, but it still informs everything we do. It can really help make the whole atmosphere in rehearsal much more playful when people feel empowered and they know, some crazy thing isn't going to happen to them in rehearsal.
for sure. Yeah. So yeah, kind of switching gears then to
Mhm.
embedded and Telltale cell phone specifically. What's your elevator pitch for these?
Oh gosh, the Poe stories on some level are so much fun because he's kind of inventing this genre of horror when he was writing.
Mhm.
And to take them with a little bit of a sense of humor and translate them into modern terms, I think is really fun. And that hopefully is what we're going to convey, that there'll be elements of it that are, I don't know if they'll be scary, but they might be scary-ish or sort of in the realm of scary. I, I think they're going to be really fun, and they give us a chance because it's a new work series because the pieces are short. Gives us a chance to try some things on the opera stage that we might not necessarily try if we were doing the whole production. So we'll just be, all of us on the production side get to be a little more playful.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And so, yeah, like you said, they are new. So
Mhm.
Embedded has had two productions so
Yep.
far, Fargo and Fort Worth. So coming in as a director, what does it mean to work on a piece that has been staged before, but it's obviously still extremely new. It's still finding itself, so what's kind of your job in that process?
Yeah, and we actually just got a new copy of the score from the composer, so there's little adjustments and things. So I think it will feel fairly fresh.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of the story, the libretto of Embedded especially leaves very open ended how the story is going to be told. We go to a bunch of different locations, including driving in a car, and how you tell that story. There could be lots and lots of different ways to tell it. I think we now have some technology available, and especially some video effects that wouldn't have been available to the people who did the first two productions. So I think that's going to be fun to figure out the way to tell the story. And then of course, a whole new cast and a whole new take on it. So I think the job of the director in that situation, you don't want to reinvent the wheel. Like the things that work, and the piece was composed around certain ideas. So you certainly want to take the best ideas from previous productions, but then where we can go a little further and tell the story a little more clearly, I think that's fun. Um, and then the Telltale cell phone, I actually have not seen a production of that. There's not a video of another production. So that one I'm really working from scratch. So I actually don't know how they staged it the first time, and we'll really get to invent that one from scratch.
Great. What excites you the most about these two shows?
Um, well, first of all, the cast. I think it's a really good group. We've done some music rehearsals, some staging rehearsals, and it's just some really terrific performers who are very playful, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun with that. The second piece, I think, is the scenic elements that we're going to get to play with. We have a video designer who's involved, Benjamin Buchwald. He'll serve as the assistant director, and then he's also designing the video elements, and that's going to allow us to have a lot of fun with some projected things in the storytelling. And then in Telltale Cell Phone, we're going to go completely the opposite end. So it'll be a very kind of low tech version. We'll use a sheet and some shadow puppetry and just some other kinds of very low tech kind of storytelling. And I think the contrast between them should be really fun.
Nice. Has there been anything in this rehearsal or production process so far that has surprised you?
Well, not yet. We're not so far into rehearsal.
Mhm.
I mean, I guess the surprise, the pleasant surprise, and I don't know if it's a surprise, but just how creative everybody is. How willing people are. So, the Charlottesville Opera team, how willing everybody is to say, "Oh, great, that sounds like a great idea. I wonder how we would execute that. Let's figure it out." And just how game everyone is. It's
Mhm.
not a surprise, but you don't always meet it. Like you always hope that that's going to be the spirit of it. It's nice to discover when it's true. I also really like the venue. We got a new venue recently,
Yeah.
but I don't know if audiences have been in that venue yet, but wow, what a terrific space.
Yeah, it is a really cool space. I went and saw a production there recently, and it's super fun.
Yeah. Is it recently opened
No,
or relatively recently?
it's been around. I think it's been around since like 2000. it's been around for a while. Like
Okay.
probably at least 10 years.
Yeah.
But we have partnered with Live Arts in the past, but not kind of in this capacity before, as far as us like being up doing like a production in their space fully.
No, that's
Um,
great.
so yeah.
Yeah. And do you normally perform in a space that small?
No, we typically, I mean, Stab is a lot bigger, and the Paramount is also a much bigger house as well. So this is
Yeah.
probably the small, well, not the smallest space we've performed in, but at least in recent years, probably the smallest space we've performed in.
That's great. Well, audiences, if people haven't experienced seeing an opera in a much smaller venue like that, it's really fun. The voices reach you in a completely different way in a smaller space. Early history of opera, they were always performing them in smaller spaces, and then more modern, the houses get bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's really fun to be that close to the singers. You really get a completely different sense of the power of those voices when you come into a space like this one.
Mm, yeah, that makes sense. That sounds exciting. I'm sure you can like feel the vibration of their voices.
We always do, usually when we're rehearsing an opera, we'll do what we call a room run, which is the last run through of the opera before we go into the theater. And that's always in the rehearsal hall. And anybody that works in opera will almost always tell you that some of their favorite performances of opera they have ever seen in their lives have been those room runs, because you're close to everybody and everybody's still experimenting and everybody's, figuring out what they're doing. But those voices just shake you in a completely different way when you're in a small space.
That's amazing. So every night or for our two performances, people will get to feel like they're in a room run, basically.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a rare occurrence because obviously the reason we don't do audiences in room runs is there's no space for the audience. So we enjoy having a much larger audience there. And there are advantages. Obviously, there are great things that you can do in a really big space, but the chance to see professional opera singers in a small space is not to be missed.
Yeah, very cool. So another question is, opera, we often talk about how opera is for everyone. Here at
Mhm.
Charlottesville Opera, often, opera has a reputation for being like, these, like you were saying, these large venues and very like old and European, things are usually in other languages written hundreds of years ago. Obviously, with Embedded and Telltale Cell Phone as part of our Wallace Works program, they are two short American operas sung in English. One about a news anchor, one about a guy driven mad for a cell phone. So what do you have to say about, to someone who thinks that like maybe opera isn't for them?
Oh, yeah, these are great places to start. I mean, production is going to be all about storytelling, and the story does kind of drive forward in a way that, sometimes the story really drives forward in opera, and sometimes it is more about sometimes it is more about an emotional moment. I think the thing that opera does uniquely well of all of the art forms is it tells a story, it brings you to an inner emotional moment, and then it expands upon what it feels like to be in that moment. And because it's music, the music can sort of expand in time and allow you to really feel deeply what the characters are feeling. These operas are great examples of that in a sort of compact form. The story gets told really efficiently, and then when we get to that emotional moment, when we get to, Sylvia is our main character in Embedded, is struggling with aging and what that means in her career and what that means for her as a woman, and sort of all of those emotional things that she's feeling come out in the music. I think these pieces are going to be great ways to sort of take you to what that essential experience of going to the opera is, in a form that is just very understandable right off the bat.
I have one more question, and then Jess, if you have any questions, if you want to dive in any that we missed. But so obviously both of these operas are inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. So what do you think about Poe translates so well into opera?
Well, the fact that the stories are so atmospheric, that they are so much describing an experience, and his stories very often, these two are great examples of it, they sort of expand in time. The way he writes, he's often repeating himself and giving a thought and then the same thought again and the same thought again, because he's trying to create that inner state of mind. So as you, the reader, are going through it, your mind is going through having that thought, the sort of mania that the characters are going through gets repeated several times. The music is is another and probably better way of doing that, of conveying what that feels like. So I think, yeah, I think they are. I mean, I do think the Poe stories are really kind of uniquely well suited to be turned into operas. I've worked on a lot of new operas, and a lot of times they'll take something that has a really long plot to it. And opera is not great at delivering a whole bunch of plot. What it's really good at doing is that inner emotional experience. And that's what we're really getting out of these Poe pieces.
Just a final, is there anything that you were hoping we would ask you that we didn't, or anything that you want, audiences to know?
No, I don't think so. Other than, I mean, I think you hit on it. This one's going to be pretty good for I think it's going to be good for people of all ages, be good for families. I think it's going to be fun.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think that's all that we need. That was
Absolutely. Yeah.
really insightful and really interesting, especially your work as an intimacy coordinator, and how that all works in, and just everything you said about like Poe being well suited to opera is super, super interesting. And obviously Virginia, everyone loves Poe. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
that's particularly relevant here. So I think that'll be really nice.
Yeah. Well, aren't the Baltimore Ravens? They're named after they're the Ravens
Yes.
because of Poe, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes.
I know there probably is not another. I mean, are there any other professional sports teams that are named after a literary reference? Like that seems like that's got to be
Probably not.
impossible.
That's pretty
Yeah.
Probably
impressive.
not. I feel like maybe there's like a minor league baseball team because they have crazy names. I
That's true.
feel
There's got to be
like.
one. There's got to be one somewhere. But yeah, but certainly a major league team. I can't think of anything that
No.
has. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, good on
which is
them.
pretty good.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So thank you so much for your time, Doug.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Great. All
Great.
right.
All right.
Well,
Well,
we'll
thank
talk soon.
you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.